The auction block in Agua Caliente, Arizona was no place for a woman like Violet Owens. Yet there she stood in the merciless August sun of 1882, her hands trembling as the auctioneer's voice boomed across the dusty town square, announcing her like she was nothing more than livestock to be sold to the highest bidder. Her father's gambling debts had finally caught up with them, and when Thomas Owens couldn't produce the $3,000 he owed to Marcus Brennan, the territory's most ruthless saloon owner and loan shark, Brennan had given him a choice: watch his daughter sold to cover his debts or face a bullet. Thomas had chosen his own survival, and now Violet stood before a crowd of leering men, her green eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the gathering, refusing to acknowledge the horror of her situation. She was 22 years old, had worked as a school teacher for the past 3 years, and had never imagined her life would come to this. The cotton dress she wore was her finest, though patches showed at the hem where she'd mended it countless times. Her auburn hair was pinned back in a simple bun, and despite the circumstances, she held her chin high, determined not to give these men the satisfaction of seeing her break. The bidding started at $500. A rancher with tobacco-stained teeth raised his hand first, and Violet felt bile rise in her throat. Another man joined in, then another. The price climbed slowly, painfully, each increment feeling like another nail in the coffin of her freedom. She could see her father standing at the edge of the crowd, unable to meet her eyes, his face ashen with shame. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to curse him for his weakness, but mostly she just felt hollow. Then a voice cut through the crowd, deep and steady. $6,000. The entire square fell silent. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned. Violet's gaze snapped to the source of the voice, and she saw a tall man pushing through the crowd. He wore dusty trail clothes, a black hat pulled low over his face, and walked with the confident stride of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When he reached the front of the crowd and looked up at her, Violet saw eyes the color of storm clouds, set in a sun-weathered face that might have been carved from the desert rock itself. "Did I stutter?" the man said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. $6,000. That's double what's owed if my arithmetic is correct. The auctioneer looked to Marcus Brennan, who stood near the platform with his arms crossed. Brennan was a heavy-set man with a thick black beard and cold eyes that had seen every kind of cruelty the territory had to offer. He studied the stranger with obvious suspicion. "That's a lot of money for one woman," Brennan said slowly. "You got that kind of cash on you, stranger?" The cowboy reached into his vest and pulled out a leather pouch, tossing it to the auctioneer. The sound of gold coins clinking together was unmistakable. "Count it if you don't believe me, but I'm not a patient man, so I'd appreciate you moving this along." The auctioneer opened the pouch with shaking hands, and his eyes widened as he counted. "It's all here, Mr. Brennan." $6,000 in gold. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Then she's yours. Transaction complete." He turned to leave, clearly unhappy about the situation but unable to argue with double the money he was owed. Violet felt her legs go weak. She'd been sold, actually sold, to a complete stranger who'd paid an enormous sum for reasons she couldn't begin to fathom. The cowboy climbed the steps to the platform, and as he drew closer, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, probably no more than 26 or 27. His face was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with a strong jaw and a scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of a hard life. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. "I'm not an invalid," Violet said, her voice sharper than she intended. Fear made her defensive. "Didn't say you were." He held out his hand. "My name is Vincent Foster, and I think we should get out of here before anyone changes their mind about this arrangement." Violet ignored his hand and descended the platform steps on her own, her legs shaky but functional. Vincent Foster fell into step beside her, one hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. The crowd parted as they walked through, and Violet could feel dozens of eyes boring into her back. Somewhere in that crowd, her father was watching, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't. Vincent led her to a hitching post where a magnificent bay horse stood waiting, along with a smaller chestnut mare. He'd clearly come prepared for 2 riders. Without asking permission, he placed his hands on Violet's waist and lifted her onto the chestnut. The gesture was practical rather than forward, but Violet still stiffened at the contact. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded as he swung onto his own horse. "Somewhere we can talk without an audience," Vincent replied, urging his horse forward. Violet had little choice but to follow, the mare's reins already tied to Vincent's saddle in a lead line. They rode in silence through the streets of Agua Caliente, past the saloons and general stores, the church with its whitewashed walls, and the rows of adobe houses that housed most of the town's population. Violet had lived here her entire life, had taught children their letters in the one-room schoolhouse on the edge of town, had walked these dusty streets 1,000 times. Now she was leaving, and she had no idea if she'd ever return. Vincent didn't stop until they were well outside of town, following a narrow trail that led into the rocky hills. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, he pulled his horse to a stop near a cluster of mesquite trees that provided some shade. He dismounted and then helped Violet down, though she tried to manage on her own. "You paid $6,000 for me," Violet said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I assume you have expectations." Vincent removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark brown hair. "I have expectations, yes. I expect you to listen to what I'm about to say." "And then what? You'll force me to become your wife, your servant, your property." The words tumbled out, all the fear and anger and helplessness of the day finally breaking through her careful control. "No," Vincent's voice was firm. "I'm going to give you a choice, Miss Owens. A real choice which is more than anyone else in that town was offering." Violet stared at him, confusion cutting through her anger. "What are you talking about?" Vincent leaned against a boulder, his expression weary. "My name is Vincent Foster. I own a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here, near the foothills of the Huachuca Mountains. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's profitable and it's mine. I have 20 hands working for me, good men who know their business. I came into Agua Caliente today to hire a few more workers and buy supplies. I heard about the auction, heard what your father had done. So you decided to buy me out of the goodness of your heart." Violet's voice dripped with skepticism. "No man paid $6,000 without expecting something in return." "I decided that what was happening was wrong," Vincent corrected, "and I had the means to stop it. Those other men, the ones bidding on you, I know their type. I've seen what happens to women who end up in situations like yours. I couldn't stand there and let it happen." Violet wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the desert heat. "You said you were giving me a choice." "What choice?" Vincent met her eyes steadily. "You're free. I paid off your father's debts, and now you don't owe anyone anything. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. If you want to stay in Agua Caliente, I'll give you enough money to start over. If you want to leave, I'll buy you a ticket to any town you choose. California, Texas, Colorado, wherever. You're not my property, Miss Owens. You're a free woman." The words didn't make sense. Violet shook her head, trying to process what he was saying. "No one does that." No one pays $6,000 just to set someone free. What do you really want from me? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. There is one more option I'd like to offer you, but I want to be clear that it's just that. An option. You're under no obligation to accept. And what's that? Come work at my ranch. I need someone to manage the household, do the cooking and cleaning for the hands. It's hard work, but I pay fair wages. $40 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters, your privacy. You'd be an employee, nothing more and nothing less. You could save your wages and leave whenever you wanted. Violet studied him carefully, looking for any sign of deception. Any hint of the trap she was certain must be hidden in his words. But Vincent's face showed only honest exhaustion and something that might have been hope. Why? She asked finally. Why would you do this? Vincent pushed away from the boulder and took a step closer, though he was careful to maintain a respectful distance. Because I know what it's like to be powerless. I know what it's like to have your choices taken away. And because someone once helped me when they didn't have to, and I've been looking for ways to pay that forward ever since. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. Violet felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd built up in the hours since learning of her father's betrayal. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wasn't ready to cry, not yet. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. There's a boarding house in town run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. Good woman, won't ask questions you don't want to answer. I can set you up there for as long as you need. And if I decide to take the job at your ranch, then we'll discuss the details and make sure you're comfortable with everything before you agree to anything. Violet took a deep breath, trying to organize her scattered thoughts. The logical thing would be to take his money and leave the territory entirely. Start fresh somewhere no one knew her or her shame. But the thought of being alone in a strange city with no friends and no connections terrified her almost as much as the auction had. At least at Vincent's ranch, she'd have work and a place to stay while she figured out her next move. I'll take the job, she said finally. But I want it understood that this is a business arrangement. If you expect anything more from me, anything at all, then the answer is no. Understood, Vincent said simply. He pulled a piece of paper from his vest pocket. This is a contract I had drawn up. It specifies your wages, your duties, and your rights as an employee. You can have a lawyer look it over if you want, make sure everything is legitimate. Violet took the paper and read through it carefully. The terms were exactly as he described, laid out in clear legal language. At the bottom was a clause stating that either party could terminate the employment at any time with 1 week's notice. It was more than fair. It was generous. I'll sign it, she said. Vincent produced a pencil and Violet signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Vincent signed as well, then handed her a copy. We can head back to town tonight if you want, get you settled at Mrs. Patterson's place, or we can ride to the ranch now. It'll be dark by the time we get there, but I have a guest room you can use tonight, and we can sort out everything else in the morning. Violet thought of returning to Agua Caliente, of facing the stares and whispers, of possibly running into her father. The thought made her stomach churn. I'd rather go to the ranch. Ranch it is, then. They mounted their horses again, and Vincent led the way north as the sun sank lower on the horizon. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of hooves on hard, packed earth, and the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush, with the mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. Can I ask you something? Violet said finally, breaking the silence. Go ahead. You said someone helped you once. What happened? Vincent was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, remembering. I grew up in Missouri. My father died when I was 12, and my mother couldn't manage the farm on her own. We lost everything. I ended up on the streets in Kansas City, stealing to survive. I was 15 when I got caught trying to rob a man named Samuel Foster. He was a wealthy rancher, could have had me thrown in jail or worse. Instead, he gave me a choice. He said I could face the law or I could come work for him, learn an honest trade. He gave you his name, Violet realized. He and his wife never had children of their own. They took me in, taught me everything about running a ranch, about being a man of integrity. When Samuel died 5 years ago, he left me enough money to start my own place. His wife, Eleanor, passed the year before. They saved my life, Miss Owens, gave me a future when I had no right to expect one. The story explained so much. Violet felt her suspicion finally begin to ease. I'm sorry for your loss. They sound like good people, the best I've ever known. Vincent glanced back at her. I'm not trying to be them. I'm not looking to save anyone. But when I heard what was happening to you, I couldn't walk away. Wouldn't have been able to live with myself. They rode on as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Violet found herself studying the man ahead of her, this cowboy who'd upended her entire world in the span of an hour. He sat easy in the saddle, clearly at home on horseback, and there was something solid about him, dependable. She'd learned the hard way not to trust easily, but something in her gut told her that Vincent Foster was exactly what he appeared to be, a man trying to do the right thing. It was full dark by the time they reached the ranch. Violet could see lights glowing in the windows of several buildings spread across a valley floor. Vincent led her past a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and what looked like a bunkhouse before stopping at a 2-story house with a wide front porch. It was built of wood and stone, solid and well-maintained, larger than she'd expected. This is home, Vincent said, dismounting. He helped Violet down and then called out toward the barn. Ben, can you take care of the horses? A young man emerged from the barn, probably no more than 18 or 19. Sure thing, boss. Who's the lady, Miss Owens? She'll be managing the household from now on. Treat her with respect. Yes, sir. Ben took the reins of both horses, his eyes curious but polite. Vincent led Violet up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was neat, but clearly lacking a woman's touch. The furniture was functional rather than decorative, and there was dust on the mantelpiece. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, and a staircase led to the second floor. Kitchen's through there, Vincent said, pointing to a doorway. Pantry's well stocked. The hands eat breakfast at 5 in the morning and dinner at 6 in the evening. Usually they fend for themselves for the midday meal. I've been doing the cooking myself lately, but I'm not much good at it. I can cook, Violet said. Her mother had taught her well before she died of fever when Violet was 16. I'm counting on it. Come on, I'll show you the guest room. He led her upstairs to a small but clean bedroom with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the valley. Someone had made the bed with fresh linens, and there was a wash basin on the dresser. Bathrooms down the hall, Vincent said. I had indoor plumbing installed last year, one of the few luxuries I allow myself. Your permanent quarters will be the room next to this one, slightly bigger, but I'll need a day or two to get it properly cleaned and furnished. This will do for tonight, though. It's fine, Violet said. More than fine, actually. The room was nicer than anywhere she'd slept in years. Vincent lingered in the doorway. I imagine you're exhausted. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Help yourself to anything you need. We can talk more in the morning, go over your duties in detail. Mr. Foster, Violet said as he turned to leave. He looked back at her. You can call me Vincent. Everyone does. Vincent, then. Thank you for today, for all of it. Something softened in his expression. You're welcome, Miss Owens. Sleep well. He closed the door quietly behind him, and Violet was finally alone. She sank onto the bed, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. The events of the day crashed over her all at once. This morning she'd woken in her small room in her father's house, believing her biggest problem was convincing him to stop gambling. By noon, she'd been standing on an auction block. Now she was in a stranger's house, employed as his housekeeper, her entire life transformed in the span of a few hours. She should have been terrified. Part of her was. But another part, a part she barely wanted to acknowledge, felt something that might have been hope. Violet didn't cry herself to sleep that night, though she came close. Instead, she lay in the darkness and made herself a promise. She would work hard, save her wages, and prove to herself and everyone else that she was more than what her father had tried to make her. She would survive this, and somehow she would thrive. When morning came, Violet woke to the sound of men's voices outside and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She washed quickly and put on the same dress she'd worn yesterday, painfully aware that she had no other clothes. Everything she owned was still at her father's house, and she had no intention of going back for it. She made her way downstairs and found Vincent in the kitchen, attempting to cook breakfast for what looked like a small army. He glanced up when she entered, and relief crossed his face. Thank God. I was about to set something on fire. Let me handle it, Violet said, rolling up her sleeves. She surveyed the available ingredients and got to work, frying up eggs, bacon, and potatoes while Vincent set out plates and utensils. It felt strange to be working beside him in such a domestic setting, but also oddly natural. The ranch hands started filing in as she finished cooking. A diverse group of men ranging in age from Ben's 18 years to a grizzled cowboy who looked to be pushing 60. They all stopped short when they saw Violet, clearly surprised. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Violet Owens," Vincent announced. "She'll be managing the household from now on. I expect you all to treat her with the utmost respect. Anyone who doesn't can find employment elsewhere. Clear?" A chorus of "Yes, sir," and "Yes, boss," answered him. The men settled at the long table, and Violet served them breakfast. They ate with the single-minded focus of men who'd been doing hard physical labor, and more than one of them complimented her cooking. The praise felt good, normal, a reminder that she had skills and value beyond what her father had reduced her to. After breakfast, Vincent walked with her around the ranch, showing her the layout and explaining her responsibilities. In addition to cooking for the hands, she'd be expected to keep the main house clean, do the laundry, and manage the household accounts. It was a lot of work, but nothing she couldn't handle. "I need to make a trip into town tomorrow," Vincent said as they stood on the porch, looking out over the ranch. "To file some paperwork and pick up supplies. You're welcome to come along if you want. Might be good to get clothes and personal items." Violet hesitated. The thought of returning to Agua Caliente made her stomach knot. "I don't have money for clothes. I'll advance you against your first month's wages. You can pay me back gradually." It was another kindness she hadn't expected. Violet nodded slowly. "All right, thank you." The day passed in a blur of activity. Violet threw herself into her work, cleaning the main house from top to bottom, taking inventory of the pantry and planning meals for the week. It felt good to be busy, to have purpose. The hands were respectful and kept their distance, though she caught several of them watching her curiously when they thought she wasn't looking. Vincent was gone most of the day, out with his men working cattle. Violet saw him briefly at dinner, which she served promptly at 6. He thanked her for the meal, complimented her pot roast, and then disappeared to his office to work on the ranch accounts. He was courteous but distant, clearly making an effort to give her space and maintain professional boundaries. That night, Violet lay in the guest room and realized she hadn't thought about the auction all day. She'd been too busy, too focused on her new responsibilities. It was a relief, this distraction, even if she knew the memories would come back to haunt her eventually. The next morning, they made the trip into Agua Caliente in Vincent's wagon. The ride was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the town, Violet felt every eye turned toward them. News of yesterday's auction and Vincent's dramatic purchase had clearly spread. People stared and whispered as Vincent helped her down from the wagon. "Ignore them," Vincent said quietly. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." He escorted her to the general store, where the owner's wife helped her select several practical dresses, undergarments, a warm coat for the coming winter, and basic toiletries. Vincent paid for everything without comment, then took her to the bank where he arranged for the cost to be deducted from her future wages in small installments. As they were leaving the bank, a familiar figure stepped into their path. Thomas Owens looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His face was haggard, his eyes bloodshot. "Violet," he said, his voice breaking, "please, I need to talk to you." Violet felt Vincent tense beside her, but she held up a hand. This was her fight. "There's nothing to say. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Brennan said he'd kill me. I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice," Violet said, her voice cold. "You could have stopped gambling. You could have faced the consequences of your own actions. Instead, you sold your daughter. Do you have any idea what would have happened to me if Mr. Foster hadn't intervened?" Thomas flinched as if she'd struck him. I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But please, you have to understand, I don't have to understand anything. You stopped being my father the moment you put me on that auction block. I have nothing more to say to you." She walked past him, her head high, Vincent falling into step beside her. Behind them, she could hear her father calling her name, but she didn't turn around. That part of her life was over. "You all right?" Vincent asked quietly once they were back in the wagon. "No," Violet admitted, "but I will be." The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Violet rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, spent her days managing the household and preparing meals, and fell into bed exhausted each night. The work was hard but satisfying, and she felt herself growing stronger, both physically and mentally. Vincent was a good employer, fair and respectful. He never asked more of her than what they'd agreed to, never crossed the boundaries they'd established. But Violet couldn't help noticing little things about him. The way he was always first up in the morning and last to bed at night, working alongside his men rather than just directing them. The way he was patient with Ben, the youngest hand, teaching him the finer points of ranch management. The quiet generosity with which he treated everyone, from his employees to the merchants in town. She found herself looking forward to the brief interactions they had each day. Breakfast, where he'd tell her about the work planned for the day. Dinner, where he'd ask her opinion on various matters related to the household. The occasional evening when he'd sit on the porch and she'd join him with coffee, and they'd talk about nothing in particular as the sun set over the mountains. It was dangerous, this growing comfort she felt around him. Violet reminded herself constantly that this was just a job, that Vincent was just her employer, that she needed to maintain professional distance. But her heart seemed to have other ideas. 2 months into her employment, a late autumn storm rolled in, bringing cold wind and driving rain. One of the hands, a man named Jack, was thrown from his horse during a cattle drive and broke his leg badly. Vincent and two other men carried him back to the ranch house, and Vincent sent Ben to fetch the doctor from town. "Miss Owens, I need your help," Vincent said, his face grim. "Jack's in bad shape. The bone's broken through the skin. We need to get him cleaned up and stabilized before the doctor arrives." Violet didn't hesitate. She'd helped her mother tend to injuries before, knew the basics of what needed to be done. Together, she and Vincent worked to clean the wound, stop the bleeding, and make Jack as comfortable as possible. It was grisly work, and Jack screamed more than once, but they managed. The doctor arrived an hour later and set the bone properly, praising their quick action. "You probably saved his leg," he told Vincent. "Maybe his life. That wound could have gotten infected fast. Jack would need to stay in bed for weeks while the bone healed." Vincent set him up in one of the spare rooms in the main house so Violet could keep an eye on him and help with his care. It meant more work for her, but she didn't mind. Jack was a good man, kind and soft-spoken, and he was embarrassed by the trouble he was causing. During the long days of Jack's recovery, Violet found herself spending more time in Vincent's company. He'd check on Jack regularly, and often he'd linger to talk with Violet. They discussed books they'd read, places they'd like to see someday, memories of their childhoods. Violet found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone, and Vincent did the same. "I wanted to be a teacher," she confessed one evening as they sat by Jack's bedside while he slept. "Not just at the schoolhouse in Agua Caliente, but at a real school, maybe even a college someday. I know it's foolish, women aren't exactly encouraged in higher education, but I loved learning, loved helping others learn." "That's not foolish," Vincent said quietly. "That's ambitious, admirable. What stopped you? Money, mostly. My father's gambling got worse after my mother died. I had to work to keep us afloat. The teaching position barely paid enough to cover our basic expenses. There was never anything left over for me to further my own education. You could still do it. You're only 22. You've got your whole life ahead of you." Violet smiled sadly. "After what happened after the auction, I don't think any school would hire me. My reputation is ruined." "Then go somewhere no one knows you, California, Oregon. Start fresh." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "No," he said finally. "I don't want you to leave, but I want you to be happy more than I want you to stay." Something shifted between them in that moment, some unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither of them had dared to voice. Violet felt her heart race, felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "I am happy," she said softly. "Here. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy." Vincent reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, warm and solid. "I'm glad," he said simply. They sat like that for a while, hands clasped, not needing to say anything more. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside, something precious and fragile was beginning to bloom. Jack recovered slowly but surely over the following weeks. By the time December arrived, he was up and walking with a cane, eager to get back to work despite the doctor's orders to take it easy. The relationship between Violet and Vincent had shifted into something neither of them quite knew how to define. They weren't courting, not officially, but there was an understanding between them, a tenderness that went beyond employer and employee. Vincent began finding excuses to spend time with her. He'd offer to help with tasks that didn't need two people, would seek her opinion on matters that didn't require her input. He never pushed, never demanded anything of her, but his feelings were becoming increasingly clear. And Violet found that she didn't mind. In fact, she welcomed it. One evening in mid-December, Vincent asked if she'd like to go riding with him. "There's a spot up in the hills I want to show you. Beautiful view. We could go tomorrow afternoon if you can spare the time." Violet agreed, and the next day they rode out together in the crisp winter sunshine. The spot Vincent had mentioned was a small plateau overlooking the valley, with the ranch spread out below like a toy model and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. It was breathtaking. "Samuel brought me here when I first came to work for him," Vincent said as they stood side by side, looking at the view. "Told me that the land teaches you things if you're willing to listen, about patience, about resilience, about how sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the harshest conditions." Violet glanced at him. "Is that what you see when you look at me? Something that grew in harsh conditions?" "No." Vincent turned to face her fully. "When I look at you, I see someone who refused to be broken. Someone strong and brave and beautiful. Someone I admire more than I can put into words. Vincent, I know this wasn't supposed to happen," he continued, his voice urgent now. "I know I brought you here to give you freedom, not to complicate your life further. But I can't deny what I feel anymore. I'm in love with you, Violet. I think I have been since the day I saw you standing on that auction block, refusing to let them see you cry." Violet's breath caught. She'd suspected, had hoped even, but hearing the words spoken aloud was something else entirely. "I was so angry with you at first," she said, her own voice shaking. "I couldn't understand why you'd done what you did. I kept waiting for you to reveal your true intentions, to demand something from me. But you never did. You just kept being kind and respectful and infuriatingly decent." "Infuriating, because it made me fall in love with you too." The words came out in a rush. "And I didn't want to. I didn't want to owe my happiness to anyone, didn't want to depend on someone else for my well-being. I wanted to be independent, self-sufficient." Vincent stepped closer, his hands gentle as they framed her face. "You don't owe me anything, and you are independent. You've built a life here through your own hard work. I didn't give you that, you earned it. But if you hadn't paid my father's debts, then someone else would have bought you, and the thought makes me sick. But that didn't happen. You're here because I made a choice and you made a choice, and those choices brought us to this moment. That's all." Violet reached up and covered his hands with her own. "I do love you. I'm terrified to admit it, but I do." "Don't be terrified." Vincent's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I would never hurt you, never use you. You have to know that." "I do know it. That's what makes it possible for me to love you." He kissed her then, soft and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. Violet kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I want to do this right," Vincent said. "I want to court you properly, take you to dances in town, bring you flowers, all the things a woman deserves when a man is trying to win her heart." "You've already won it," Violet said with a smile, "but I wouldn't say no to flowers." They courted through the winter, and it was the happiest time of Violet's life. Vincent was attentive without being overbearing, romantic without being presumptuous. He brought her wildflowers when they were in season, took her to the Christmas dance in Agua Caliente where they danced until midnight, spent his evenings reading aloud to her from books of poetry and adventure stories. The ranch hands quickly figured out what was happening and were universally supportive. They liked Vincent and had come to respect Violet, and they thought the two of them made a good match. Even Jack, fully recovered now and back to work, gave his blessing. "Boss has been lonely too long," he told Violet one day. "Needs someone to share his life with. Can't think of anyone better than you, Miss Owens." In February, a hard freeze hit the region and several of the cattle got sick. Vincent worked around the clock trying to save them, often coming in long after dark. exhausted and covered in grime. Violet would have hot food waiting for him, would help him wash up, would sit with him while he ate even though she was tired herself. "I don't deserve you," Vincent said one night, his head resting against the back of his chair. "Yes, you do," Violet replied firmly. "You deserve someone who sees how hard you work, who appreciates everything you do." "I do this for us now," he said quietly. "Building something that could support a family someday, if you'd want that, with me." Violet's heart skipped. "Is that a proposal?" "Not yet. When I propose, it'll be properly with a ring and everything. But I want you to know my intentions. I'm serious about you, about us. I want to marry you, Violet, when you're ready." "I'm ready now," Violet said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I know it hasn't been that long, but I know what I want. I want a life with you." Vincent pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "Then marry me, be my wife. Help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of, something we can pass on to our children someday." "Yes," Violet whispered against his neck. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed in March of 1883 in a simple ceremony at the small church in Agua Caliente. All the ranch hands attended, along with several people from town who'd come to respect Vincent's integrity and Violet's resilience. Thomas Owens was not invited, and Violet had no regrets about that. Some bridges, once burned, were better left as ashes. Violet wore a simple white dress that Vincent had bought her from the finest shop in Tucson, and she'd never felt more beautiful in her life. Vincent wore his best suit, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, tears shone in his eyes. "I love you," he mouthed as she reached him. "I love you too," she mouthed back. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the congregation wiped their eyes. The reception was held at the ranch, with the hands contributing their own special touches. Ben had learned to play fiddle and provided music. Jack had spent days building a dance floor in the barn, and the cook from one of the neighboring ranches had made a beautiful cake as a gift. Violet danced with her new husband under strings of lanterns, surrounded by people who'd become her friends, and felt truly free for the first time in her life. Not because Vincent had paid money to release her from her father's debt, but because she'd chosen this. Had chosen him, chosen this life, chosen her own happiness. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous but eager. Vincent was patient and careful, making sure Violet felt safe and loved. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Vincent's bed, which was now their bed, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the ranch eventually," Vincent said. "Maybe buy the property to the east, the one that borders our southern pasture. That would give us room to double our herd." "That sounds good," Violet agreed. "And I was thinking, once we're more established, maybe we could help other people the way you helped me. Women in bad situations, people who need a fresh start. We could offer employment, a safe place." Vincent squeezed her hand. "I love that idea. We'll do it together." The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and happiness in equal measure. Violet continued to manage the household while also helping Vincent with the ranch accounts and correspondence. She had a good head for numbers and a talent for negotiation, and together they made a formidable team. The ranch prospered under their joint management. In the spring of 1884, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Vincent. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and kissed her so thoroughly that the hands working outside couldn't help but notice and started hooting and clapping. "We're having a baby," Vincent kept repeating as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to be parents. Terrifying, isn't it? Violet said with a shaky laugh. Terrifying, Vincent agreed. And wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. He became even more attentive during her pregnancy, constantly worried about her doing too much. Violet had to firmly remind him that she was pregnant, not an invalid, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Still, his concern was touching, and she found herself falling even more deeply in love with him as the months passed. Their son was born in December of 1884, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after the man who'd saved Vincent's life all those years ago. Vincent held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Violet knew without a doubt that Samuel Foster Jr. would grow up knowing nothing but love and security. "Thank you," Vincent whispered to her as she lay recovering, exhausted but happy. "Thank you for this gift, for everything." "Thank you for seeing me as more than what others tried to make me," Violet replied. "Thank you for giving me a choice." The years passed in a blur of joy and challenge. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and everything about it. 2 years after his birth, Violet gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Catherine, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischief and curiosity. The ranch continued to expand and prosper, allowing Vincent and Violet to make good on their promise to help others. They hired several women over the years who were fleeing difficult circumstances, giving them jobs and a safe place to stay until they could get back on their feet. They paid fair wages, treated everyone with dignity, and earned a reputation throughout the territory as employers of integrity and compassion. Violet never saw her father again. She heard through gossip that he'd left Agua Caliente shortly after her wedding, drifting from town to town, his gambling problem never resolved. She felt sad about it sometimes, mourned the father he could have been, but she didn't let it poison her happiness. She'd built a new family, a chosen family, and that was enough. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Violet back to the plateau where he'd first told her he loved her. The children were with Ben, who'd become like a younger brother to both of them and was wonderful with the kids. It was just the two of them, the land and the sunset. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked as they sat side by side, watching the sky turn gold and pink. "Staying here, marrying me, building this life?" "Not for a single second," Violet said truthfully. "This is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me my freedom, and I chose to build something beautiful with it. With you." "I'm the lucky one," Vincent said. "I walked into that town square looking to hire ranch hands and found the love of my life instead." "You paid double what my father owed," Violet reminded him with a smile. "Still the most extravagant thing you've ever done." "Best money I ever spent." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. 20 years after that fateful day in Agua Caliente, Violet stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Samuel, now a young man of 19, worked with his father to break in a new horse. The twins, 17 now, were in town attending a social function, full of life and promise. The ranch had grown to be one of the most successful in the territory, and Vincent and Violet had helped dozens of people over the years, giving them the same chance at a new life that Vincent had once given to Violet. She thought sometimes about the girl she'd been, standing on that auction block, certain her life was over. That girl could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that her lowest moment would lead to her greatest joy. But life had a way of surprising you, of turning tragedy into triumph if you were willing to take the chances offered to you. Vincent caught her eye from across the yard and smiled, that same warm smile that had captured her heart years ago. She smiled back, feeling the familiar flutter of love in her chest. After all these years, he could still make her heart race with just a look. That evening, after dinner when the children had gone to their own pursuits, Vincent and Violet sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Vincent's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, and everything was peaceful. "I was thinking," Vincent said quietly. "Samuel's old enough now to take on more responsibility around here, and the twins will be graduating from school soon. Maybe it's time we took that trip you've always talked about, to San Francisco, see the ocean." Violet lifted her head to look at him in surprise. "Really? You'd leave the ranch for that long? The ranch will be fine. The hands know what they're doing, and Samuel's more than capable of managing things for a few weeks. I want to show you the world, Violet, or at least a little piece of it." Violet felt tears prick her eyes, moved by his thoughtfulness. "I'd love that. I'd love anything as long as it's with you. Then we'll do it. This spring after the calving season." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, and Violet reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She'd been sold like property, reduced to a commodity by her own father's weakness. But Vincent had seen her as a person, had given her back her humanity and her choices. And she'd chosen love, partnership, and a future she could be proud of. The scars of that day would never fully disappear. Sometimes she still woke from nightmares, reliving the moment she'd stood on that platform. But Vincent was always there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that the past couldn't hurt her anymore. Their children grew up knowing the story of how their parents met. Violet and Vincent never hid the truth, never tried to pretend it had been something other than what it was. They believed in honesty, in acknowledging both the darkness and the light. Samuel, Emily, and Catherine understood that their mother had survived something terrible and had emerged stronger for it. They understood that their father had chosen to do the right thing even when it cost him dearly. And they understood that love, real love, was about respect and choice and partnership. The ranch continued to thrive well into the new century. When Vincent and Violet were in their 50s, they finally stepped back from the day-to-day operations, turning control over to Samuel while still providing guidance and support. The twins had both married, Emily to a lawyer in Tucson and Catherine to a rancher from a neighboring property. They gave Vincent and Violet 6 grandchildren between them, and the family gatherings were always loud and joyous affairs. Vincent aged gracefully, his dark hair turning silver but his eyes remaining as sharp and kind as ever. Violet found distinguished gray in her auburn hair but didn't mind. Each line on her face, each silver strand, represented a year of happiness earned, a life well lived. They made good on their promise to see San Francisco, and over the years they traveled to many other places as well. New Orleans, Denver, Seattle. But they always came home to the ranch, to the land that had brought them together and held all their memories. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The original house had been expanded several times over the years and could now easily accommodate the crowd. Children ran through the yard, their laughter filling the air. The old hands who'd been with Vincent and Violet from the beginning were there, gray-haired now but still sharp, telling stories about the early days. Vincent stood to make a toast, raising his glass as everyone fell silent. 30 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life forever. I paid $6,000 for the most precious thing I would ever own, though I didn't own her at all. I gave Violet her freedom and she gave me her heart. Everything good in my life, everything I'm proud of, stems from that day. To my wife, my partner, my best friend, thank you for choosing me." Violet stood and kissed him as the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "Thank you for giving me the chance to choose," she whispered against his lips. Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that time always brings. Vincent developed a limp from an old riding injury that had never quite healed right. Violet's eyesight weakened, and she had to wear spectacles for reading. But their love remained constant, a steady flame that no amount of time could diminish. They were in their early 70s when Vincent fell ill. The doctor diagnosed him with pneumonia and prescribed bed rest and careful nursing. Violet refused to leave his side, sitting by his bed day and night, reading to him, talking with him, holding his hand. For a few terrifying days, it seemed they might lose him, but Vincent was as stubborn as ever and fought his way back to health. "I'm not ready to leave you yet," he told Violet when the fever finally broke. "We have more living to do." "Damn right we do," Violet said, relief making her voice shake. "Don't you dare try to escape me that easily, Vincent Foster." He recovered slowly but surely, and by spring he was back on his feet, though moving more carefully than before. They celebrated their 40th anniversary quietly, just the two of them on the porch, watching another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. 40 years, Violet marveled. "It seems impossible." "Best 40 years of my life," Vincent said. "Though I still remember that first day like it was yesterday, you standing there on that platform, so proud and brave. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, I think." "I was terrified," Violet admitted. "I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "Our life," Vincent corrected gently. "It was the beginning of our life together." They sat hand in hand as darkness fell, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would pass to their children and grandchildren, but more importantly, so would the values they'd lived by. Integrity, compassion, respect, and the fundamental belief that every person deserved dignity and choice. Vincent lived to be 78 years old, still working on the ranch right up until the end. He died peacefully in his sleep one warm June night, with Violet beside him as she'd been for over 45 years. His last words to her were simple: "Thank you for a beautiful life." Violet mourned him deeply, but didn't allow her grief to destroy her. She'd learned long ago that life was precious and not to be wasted. She continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, sharing stories about Vincent and making sure his memory lived on. She lived another 7 years, long enough to see her first great-grandchild born, a boy they named Vincent in honor of his great-grandfather. She held him in her arms and felt the circle completing, felt the continuity of family and love stretching forward into a future she wouldn't see but had helped to build. Violet Owens Foster died at the age of 84, in the same bed where she'd spent so many happy years with her husband. Her children were with her at the end, and her last words were about Vincent, about how she'd see him soon, how she'd missed him every day they'd been apart. They buried her next to Vincent on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under the shade of an oak tree they'd planted together on their first anniversary. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single inscription: "They chose love." The ranch continued for generations, remaining in the Foster family well into the 20th century. The story of how it all began, of Vincent paying double to set Violet free, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story about courage and kindness, about seeing the humanity in others, about choosing to do the right thing even when it cost you dearly. But more than anything, it was a love story. A story about two people who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built a life filled with light. A story that proved that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes if you're brave enough to take the chance. And in the end, that's what both of them had done. Vincent had taken a chance on saving a stranger, and Violet had taken a chance on trusting the man who'd saved her. Those chances had turned into choices, and those choices had turned into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a legacy that continued long after they were gone. In the wild west of Arizona Territory in 1882, a woman was sold to pay her father's debts. A cowboy paid double and set her free to choose. And she chose him, chose love, chose a future that neither of them could have imagined but both of them helped to create. It was a simple story, really, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful.